We'll go to the next bill. Mrs. Gonzalez, you're here to present on AB 1366. Just some ground rules. You weren't here to hear them earlier. We're going to allow 3 presenters, only on each side, 2 minutes each.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I want to start by accepting the committee amendments. AB 1366 codifies basically existing law for another 10 years. One of the reasons I took this bill and why it's so important to me is there are services in my community that are very important and free and haven't always been. We know, especially in immigrant communities, the ability to call home for free is extremely important. And thanks to innovations and technology, and things like WhatsApp and Skype, we now have that ability. We no longer have international calling cards on 7-Elevens everywhere, and that is a huge savings for a community like mine. However, I know that there are concerns about an completely unregulated residential VoIP situation, and I just want to allay those concerns with a few things that I want to ensure that folks who are going to be in opposition, that we are continuing to work on with them. As this bill moves forward, we will continue to add consumer protections and worker protections around disclosure to require a provider of VoIP services to disclose to a consumer during the sales transaction for VoIP services that the consumer has a right to basic telephone service. We're looking at have this written so that the consumer could call the PUC or perhaps go to a website for more information regarding basic service. We want to add insurance about service restoration standards and require interconnected residential VoIP wireline to meet defined standards of service restoration timelines the same way traditional phones do, and a percentage within those timelines except in cases of disaster or cases beyond provider control. Prorate and service credits when that doesn't happen, and enforcement to require the PUC to submit a report of outstanding new complaints regarding VoIP and IP-enabled services to the AG monthly. Those are some of the things we hope to work on over as we hopefully move this bill. And with that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Any additional witnesses in support? That would be 3 at 2 minutes. Thanks.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Jasmine Tovar, and I am the Educational Manager of the Salvadoran American Leadership and Educational Fund, SALEF. Our mission is to promote the civic participation and representation of the Latino communities and immigrant communities in the U.S. We work to make California a place where all people enjoy economical security, social justice, and political empowerment. I am here today in support of Assemblymember Gonzalez legislation, AB 1366, and to talk about why this legislation is so important to the Latino and immigrant communities in California. Latino mobile phone ownership has reached an incredible 97%, and as we have seen in the recent years, new technology apps and services have been life-changing for the Latino community and new immigrants. For disadvantaged communities and recent immigrants, these technologies and apps provide us a lifeline, a way to connect what we left behind. They provide community for those that feel alone in a new country. For others, they provide a gateway to work and educational opportunities. For example, technologies such as WhatsApp are profoundly important to recent immigrants. These types of relatively new services and apps provide free communication with loved ones in abroad. Talk a little bit of personal experience. I am the daughter of Salvadorian immigrants that fled a very bloody civil war. I have family that were political refugees all over the world. I have uncles in Paris. I have family in Madrid. I have family in Australia, family in Canada, and without such an app like WhatsApp, I wouldn't have the opportunity to communicate with my family. 2 times a week, I set my alarm at 1:30 a.m. to call my uncle and check in with him, and it's my highlight of my week. And then recently, SALEF has expanded our humanitarian work, working with asylum seekers, and not just Central American asylum seekers. We're working with African asylum seekers, Haitian asylum seekers, and also internally displaced people in Mexico and deported people in Tijuana. So we're able to communicate with our shelters and people doing the work in Tijuana to be able to provide these services. In addition to services like WhatsApp and other technologies such as Skype that have become household names, there are countless other apps and services helping the Latino.
Just want to remind you of the time, and I want to be fair to everybody.
Yes. Let me just go ahead. For this reason, I ask for the support for the AB 1366.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. Chris Rosa on behalf of the Nonprofit Alliance. Technology availability and affordability is paramount to keeping the doors open for nonprofits in California. Nonprofits rely on access to data. The price of data skyrockets, as we believe it will happen if the PUC is allowed to unnecessarily expand its reach. The consequences of increased prices, higher prices of data, means charities will no longer be able to absorb the cost, and those charities that will be able to stay open will have to significantly cut their programs. We use consumer data and third-party data providers to ensure marketing messages are delivered to those who are most likely to benefit. Without this fair price data, nonprofits cannot effectively connect with those who we target for our programmatic missions. For example, the cost pressures would impact the United Farm Workers' ability to provide services to their workers. Our partners at the UFW argue California farm workers would not receive key information that they need about their rights under state law, including shade, water, breaks, protective clothing, sexual harassment, off-the-clock work, employer-provided tools, the right to concerted activity, and to improve wages and working conditions if data becomes cost prohibitive. If the PUC is allowed to expand its reach, nonprofits may be the first to suffer the first full impact of this change, while our commercial partners are forced to increase their data prices, increases that nonprofits cannot absorb. AB 1366 protects charities and nonprofits by preventing unnecessary and potentially devastating cost pressures of needless PUC reach while still protecting consumers and promoting public safety. For these reasons, we ask for your aye vote.
Any additional witnesses in support?
Yes. My name is Eric Brown. I'm the president of the California Telehealth Network, which is the largest collaborative of safety net clinics and hospitals in the state that are serving underserved and rural patient populations. I want to start with just a very brief story. I know I only have 2 minutes, and I don't want to run afoul, but I was in the town of Tehachapi last week. If you know where Tehachapi is, it is in the mountains that rim the Central Valley and the Mojave Desert. There's a critical access hospital there. In that town, a young mom decides she wants to have a home birth of her baby with a midwife. The baby's born. There are problems. They go to the local critical access hospital in Tehachapi, where they realize they don't have the pediatric intensive care expertise they need, but because they have an IP-enabled broadband connection through the California Telehealth Network, supplied by AT&T in this case, to Valley Children's Hospital, about 3 hours away in Madera, the baby's life is saved. They're able to beam in and video conference to get the expertise they need to take care of that child. This is just one example that we see and hear about every day in our travels. It could not be possible without the right regulatory framework that's been in place here in California. Our organization was actually formed in 2012, about the time that the original legislation was put in place. We've been able to work closely with innovation companies in the healthcare space to see how we can use technology to expand access to care in rural and underserved communities. 2 years ago, we merged with an Oregon-based nonprofit with a similar mission called OCHIN, O-C-H-I-N. If you haven't heard of them, they do innovation around how data is handled and information is shared for community health centers now all over the country. We are now working with OCHIN to expand the reach of IP-enabled services into rural and safety net clinics and hospitals.
The time, please.
And it's for these reasons that we also support 1366.
Thank you. Any additional support witnesses? Again, name, organization, and position only, please.
Chair and members, I'm Gary Passmore, President of the Congress of California Seniors, and we rise in strong support of this bill. Thank you.
Aziza Davis Goins, President CEO for the Sacramento Black Chamber of Commerce, and we strongly support AB 1366.
Julian Canetti, representing California Hispanic Chambers of Commerce, in support.
Gary McDonald, Executive Director of Lighthouse Counseling and Family Resource Center, in support.
Steve Carlson, CTIA, the Wireless Industry Trade Association. Happy to be in support.
Courtney Jensen with TechNet in support.
Kelly Hitt with the Computing Industry Association in support. Thank you.
Kristen Nimmers on behalf of Bay Area Council in support.
Naomi Padron with McHugh Kepke and Associates on behalf of the California Manufacturers and Technology Association in support.
Sophia Garcia with Verizon in support.
Glenn Fuji, National Executive Director for OPAPA, strongly support.
Linda Ng, representing OCA Sacramento, in support.
Good afternoon, Richard Rotha on behalf of Society for the Blind in support.
Bill Devine, AT&T, we support.
Carolyn McIntyre, California Cable Telecommunications Association, in support.
Dominic Damari here on behalf of Frontier Communications in support.
John Moffitt for Comcast in support.
Pam Loomis on behalf of Consolidated Communications in support.
Jinky Dollar, OCE Sacramento President, in support.
Les Shepard representing the Cal Asian Chamber of Commerce in support.
Any main opposition witnesses? You can come up to the table now. Please, you may begin.
Good afternoon. I'm Regina Costa for TURN. We're in opposition, and I thank you for the opportunity to appear before you, Mr. Chairman and committee. The main difference between 2012 and 2019 is that in 2012, the majority of phone lines in California were not VoIP, and now they are. Ultimately, all landline phone service will be provided over VoIP, and much, if not all, of our voice and data is now transmitted, at least in part, over networks that utilize IP-enabled services. If this bill was about apps, we would not be in this room. But it isn't. It's much, much broader. It has to do with oversight over all of our critical communication services. VoIP, under this bill, no state agency could take action addressing key telecommunications public safety or consumer protection issues involving an IP-enabled telecom service unless the legislature specifically passed a law allowing it. VoIP is now used by the majority of California landline phone service customers to call 911 and receive emergency alerts. AT&T and other VoIP providers say that they do not have to comply with the Commission's disaster relief consumer protection efforts because of the provisions that AB 1366 seeks to extend. The CPUC cannot require VoIP providers to offer landline discounts to low-income households. Forbidding the CPUC from overseeing VoIP puts that program at risk to the detriment of people on low incomes, including the elderly and people of color. Carrier of last resort obligations do not apply to VoIP providers, which means they have no obligation to provide service to all customers without discrimination. The day comes when VoIP is the only game in town, those protections disappear. In an all-IP world, customers lose the right to file complaints that are addressed by the CPUC or any other state agency. In 2012, no one could foresee the need for electric utilities to shut off power to prevent or mitigate the threat of wildfires. But that is now our reality. Most customers are using VoIP. Those services and networks depend on commercial power to function, and state agencies charged with ensuring public safety and reliable communications
That's a little over 2 minutes, but
Okay.
we can wrap it. Thanks.
No matter what technology is being used, we cannot compromise consumer protection and public safety, and we urge you to vote no.
Good afternoon, Chairman Santiago and members.
I'm Tom Runyon, and I'm proud to serve as Vice President of CWA District 9, representing over 60,000 workers in California. Over the past few years, our workers on the front lines of the telecommunications industry have been hearing directly from consumers regarding problems with their phone service. Our members have also witnessed safety issues with phone lines that have been neglected due to lack of proper oversight and regulation. Unfortunately, our workers do not see these issues getting any better without state intervention, something that current law prohibits. The deregulation of VoIP telephone service under SB 1161 has led to significant gaps in consumer protections. Traditional landline telephone customers are able to file a complaint with the CPUC, and the Commission can take action. They can be sure outages will be restored within 24 hours, and they can assume that their calls will be answered in a reasonable time. Unfortunately, VoIP users have no such assurances or protections. CWA technicians working in the field see the disparity firsthand. They prioritize restoring traditional phone service while VoIP customers are left waiting. This is a fundamentally unfair situation, especially considering that most customers have no idea that they have been switched to VoIP service in the first place. Unlike 2012, the majority of home phone service would now be covered by the provisions of AB 1366. CWA has long supported policies that protect consumers and hold telecommunications providers accountable for their infrastructure and service. By extending the provisions of SB 1161 indefinitely, AB 1366 would ensure that all of the issues that our workers have identified become permanent. This would give telecommunications companies virtually free rein to ignore the needs of their customers. Now that a majority of home phone customers in California are on VoIP,
just want to remind you the time limits.
With service switching more and more each day, the defeat of AB 1366 will restore critical protections for consumers and public safety. Therefore, we request and urge a no vote.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Santiago, Vice Chair Obernote, Ernesto with the EFF. The EFF's opposition to this legislation is very different in nature. We are primarily concerned with the future of broadband access competition. A prohibition on state, county, and local governments from having any authority over IP-based services, i.e. broadband, when the future of high-speed access right now is devolving to a high-speed cable monopoly, will mean high prices and lack of choice for most of your constituents. Ask your friends and family how many choices do they have at home right now when it comes to fast internet speeds, and a majority will tell you one or none. That was not the case in 2012 when this law was enacted. In 2012, most Californians had 2 or 3 choices for speeds that qualified for broadband, and Google was entering the market. You had the FCC regulating broadband for promoting competition and access. But today, you have none of these. Today, Google stopped deploying fiber, Verizon doesn't deploy Fios, and AT&T's fiber deployment is a government mandate that will expire by this year. Government data indicates that rural and low-income people are the ones that are facing monopolies, or most likely facing monopolies in the high-speed services. And that's not the same story in the international markets, where they still regulate their telecom services. Lastly, I want to raise a very specific narrow issue that this bill represents in regards of how categorical its ban is over VoIP services. I agree with the sentiment. If this was about applications like WhatsApp or Skype, we would not be here. EFF would not be involved in opposition. And I would note that none of the supporters are at the companies that provide those services. EFF has worked with civil rights organizations to promote justice for inmates and their families when it comes to inmate carrier services. This is a different industry than your commercial industry. These are essentially telephone companies for prisons. The FCC intervened a few years ago because those companies were charging the families of inmates $50 or more for 4-minute phone calls. But the federal courts have made it clear that the FCC can only regulate long-distance calls. The state has to regulate local calls. And today, unlike 2012,
just want to remind you the time.
Thank you. Those services are VoIP services, not telephony. For these reasons and others, I urge you to reject this legislation. And thank you for your time.
Any additional opposition witnesses? Just a reminder, name, organization, and position only.
Mr. Chair and members, Matthew Marcus with the Public Advocate's Office. We have the independent advocate at the California Public Utilities Commission in opposition.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Liz Sorensen with Communication Workers of America, District 9. I stand in opposition of this, and I'm going to save you some time. I'm going to have my folks stand up as well that are with me today and been here all day. We've lost a lot of folks, but we stand in strong opposition of this. Thank you for your time.
Hi again, Tracy Rosenberg. I'm from Media Alliance. We are in strong opposition.
Joy Deffenbaugh, representing AARP's 3.3 million members in California. We strongly oppose this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, Mitch Steiger with the California Labor Federation, also in opposition.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Roger Dean, President of CWA, Local 9431, representing District 1 and all the rural communities. And this will have a great detriment to our communities. We already suffer from denial of service from these companies. And we ask that you please, for the sake of your constituents, vote no.
Priscilla Kidos here on behalf of the counties of Mendocino and Humboldt. We apologize for the late submission of the letter, but we respectfully oppose.
Becca Kramer Matter on behalf of the ACLU of California, also late to the opposed game, but here in opposition.
Jeff Tartagia, representing 1 million CARA members, yes, strongly in opposition.
Ignacio Hernandez on behalf of the Consumer Federation of California in opposition.
Thank you. Any questions from committee members? Seeing and hearing no questions, I want to thank the author for presenting. I heard very clearly, though, there will be some work continuing on this, and we've got to move this bill forward in order to continue that conversation alive. I heard you very, very clearly on your continuing to work on consumer and worker protections, which I thank you for, and disclosure to ensure services and service standards and restoration times. So I very much appreciate that conversation moving forward, and I rest assured that you'll address some of those issues as you move forward through the legislative process. And I heard you say also that you're going to take the committee amendments. I want to be clear about that. And this bill enjoys a due pass as amended onto the Committee on Appropriations, where I'm sure the chair will take a look at it. Would you like to close?
I would. Because I think it's really important, you know, a lot of what the opposition says, I don't disagree with. We have to do a better job of ensuring that rural areas and underserved areas have service, that they have service restored. This specifically keeps the PUC out of the game, and it puts those regulations in our hands. And let me tell you why that's so important. From the time the CPUC directed staff to add new smartphone technology to the deaf and disabled telecommunications program, it has been 9 years and the rulemaking process is still not finalized. In another example, it was 14 years after wireless consumers began paying into the Lifeline Fund before they became eligible for Lifeline, and 2 more years before VoIP customers or consumers were eligible for the to PUC proceedings. My assertion in this is that the PUC is not working. It's great to suggest that we're going to make something worse when actually this is an area that should be left to us. It should be left to the complaints of our constituents. Now, we're going to work on the complaint issue. I live in an underserved area. Absolutely. I live in the hood. Love my neighborhood. And I will tell you, it is hard. We do not get the same service as somebody in maybe Ms. Bernard Horvath's district. And that's okay. It's not okay, actually. But what we need to work on is how, I'm sorry, it's, you know, we just live in different areas, and the service provided is different. And we do want to and need to ensure that both the opportunity for service and for complaints and to have those followed up on is equal. And we are going to work with CWA on addressing that situation. I mean, the folks that we're talking about who are currently in opposition, I talk to them every day. Obviously, I'm not doing something to oppose labor. These are the people I come from and I represent, and they live in my community. We want to provide a framework by which actually service will improve, that we can have access to service, that we will have restoration time guaranteed. If we left that up to the PUC, we might get a restoration time 14 years from now. All right, so I want to ensure that we're actually writing things into this bill that strengthens the service that we're getting now, that ensures, by the way, things that are happening now with VoIP customers when they don't know that there's access to basic service, that they'll have that right and that knowledge. I actually think what we're doing is going to be much better for the workers and the consumers than what they would get under the PUC. They can, I understand the fear, I understand just this idea of regulation, but we as legislators, I think, are in a far better position to immediately act on these things than leaving it up to the PUC. So that's what I'm asking you to do today. We're going to see other bills this legislative session on VoIP services and disaster areas and things coming through, and I think we are able to regulate this. It's not the days of telecommunications when there was a monopoly. There are a number of services available, and we do, by the way, we have seen internet, access to internet prices go way down under this type of non-regulation by the PUC, and I hope to continue with that. We brought up the issue of being able to access free calls internationally, because that's a huge benefit that we've seen thanks to the fact that we don't have the PUC meddling in issues like this. I'm sorry, I hate to be so down on the PUC, kind of, but it hasn't been effective, and I know that my friends in labor understand that. And so I hope that throughout this process we can continue to work to make sure consumers are better off, workers are better off, but that we continue to have access and competition in a way that serves our communities the best. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. Do we have a first and a second? I believe we did. I apologize about that. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Motion is due pass as amended to Committee on Appropriation. Santiago.
Aye.
Santiago, aye. Obernolte. Aye. Obernolte, aye. Berner Horvat. Aye. Berner Horvat, aye. Bonta. Aye. Bonta, aye. Bro. Gibson. Aye. Gibson, aye. Holden. Kamlaga Dove. Aye. Kamlaga Dove, aye. Lowe. Patterson. Aye. Patterson, aye. Cook Silver. Aye. Cook Silver, aye. Rodriguez. Aye. Rodriguez, aye. Bro. Bro, aye.
Ten to 0 measures out.